Okay, I'm just going to give it a minute to allow everyone to come in. And Derek, can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, I think I'll get the webinar started now as we're still kind of waiting for people to trickle in. So hello everyone and welcome to the Invasive Species Center's webinar series. My name is Monica Liska and I am the Terrestrial Invasive Plant Coordinator at the Invasive Species Center, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Invasive Species Center honors the long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation peoples on the lands now known as Canada, and strives to show respect to their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of the lands, waters, and all living things, and offer our gratitude to the Indigenous people for their care and teachings about our Earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in a good relationship with Indigenous peoples, the lands and waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. The Invasive Species Center respectfully acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, the Batchewana, and the Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlements of the Métis people in the Robertson Huron Treaty area. The Invasive Species Center is a not-for-profit organization that connects stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. We've got loads of great invasive species resources on our website, including species profiles, best management practices, and more. So check us out at invasivespeciescenter.ca. You can also sign up on our homepage for our newsletter, biweekly media scan, and event invitations, which is where you can hear about more upcoming webinars. The Invasive Species Center has launched an invasive species training program that offers virtual courses on topics related to invasive species. So we currently have 5 courses available which focus on different forest and aquatic invasives. Our most recent course was just released on marbled crayfish. We do release new content regularly. So if you are interested, make sure to check out our website and sign up to receive updates on when new courses become available. Now, before we get started with today's webinar, there are a couple of things I would like to mention. There will be time for questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions at any time, just please type it in the question box, and I will read it to our presenter after the webinar. If you are having technical difficulties at any time, please type them in the chat box or respond to the email found in your registration, and we'll try to resolve it for you. We have also enabled closed captioning. So if you would like to follow along that way, you can turn that on with the closed caption button on your taskbar. And lastly, there will be a very brief survey following the webinar. So if you could take some time to fill it out, we would greatly appreciate it. So today's webinar is titled What Makes It Work? Sustaining Community Action in Invasive Species Management. And I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Derek Stone. So Derek Stone is a lifelong naturalist and wildlife enthusiast who pursued his degree in environmental studies and resource management at Trent University with a focus on ecology and public policy. Since then, Derek has engaged in multiple positions that focus on monitoring and restoring degraded environments and enthusiastically engaging the public with nature. As the Riverwood Conservancy's program director, Derek focuses on creating strong connections between nature and people and embracing those connections to support both our environment and our community. So, Derek, with that, I'm going to hand it off to you and to get the presentation started.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Monica, and thank you very much to the Invasive Species Center for having me today, because I always like to talk a little bit about what we do, and very much appreciate the kind introduction. So I'll just pull up my screen here, and as always, I'm going to ask the webinar question. Can we see that? Is that up? Are we good to go there? Excellent. Um, So yes, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to be talking about a couple things today. So just right off the bat, what to expect. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do at the Riverwood Conservancy. Talk about some of the success stories and challenges in regards to invasive species management, and where we found our successes, where we've tried some new things, as well as kind of a focus on the volunteer engagement aspect and retention, and what's really been effective from that sort of community action perspective. What we found has really worked, and hopefully to maybe encourage some questions in that regard as well. So who are we and what do we do? The Riverwood Conservancy is really right in the middle of Mississauga. We're about 3 minutes to the west of city center of Mississauga. So 150-acre space in the middle of Mississauga is certainly, we're not the size of Algonquin Park by any means, but it's a large urban space and a large natural space in the middle of an urban center. So just for context, as we're going through this, we are a heavily urbanized suburban kind of area. Um, we focus predominantly on environmental and nature-based education. We do a lot of different school groups and things like that coming in to learn about climate change, learn about nature, learn about how to engage with invasive species, that sort of thing. Gardening and horticulture is a big part of what we do. Many of the gardens on site are maintained by our volunteers. And of course, the conservation of the 150-acre site. So again, we're central Mississauga, right along the shores of the Credit River. We have quite a diverse array of landscapes. We have, riparian areas, we have forested areas, we have wetlands, we have field ecosystems, all sorts of it's quite a diverse site for what it is in the middle of Mississauga. So that's just a sort of a very much Coles Notes idea of what we generally do. And none of that is possible without volunteers. Just about every function of our organization, in fact, I think I would say every function of our organization is supported or completed by volunteers. We have roughly 1,000 volunteers who support the organization every year. Of those, we have 300 community volunteers that are persistent, like people who come out for multiple years, who are with us for a long time, who are supporting in multiple fashions, with about 700 intermittent volunteers. So those are things like community groups who might come out for a volunteer day once or maybe twice a year, that sort of thing. So the bulk of our volunteers from a unique volunteer perspective tend to be sort of those intermittent engagements, but we still get quite a bit of community interest over time. On average, we have somewhere in the realm of about 12,500 volunteer hours that are contributed yearly. So quite a bit of value happening there, with about 150 of those community volunteers supporting our conservation efforts. So pretty healthily supported by the community. So that's just for context as we move forward. I'm going to dive right into it and say, why did we start invasive species management? And initially, when the organization sort of was in its infancy, there was a very high prevalence of garlic mustard on site, and that's I've always seen that as sort of a like a gateway into invasive species management. People get into garlic mustard and then kind of realize, oh, there's quite a bit to do here. We were seeing an increase in visitors to the site at the time, and that has certainly continued. Like many sites over the pandemic, we saw a lot of people coming out to the park. We saw an increase of close to 300%. So just huge numbers of people coming to the site to enjoy it, to engage in recreation in some way, like nature-based recreation. We started realizing that those invasives were posing a major threat to the biodiversity on site, which was a major source of recreation for the people of Mississauga. And we wanted to make sure that we were protecting some of our most ecologically sensitive sites, particularly as Riverwood tends to be an environmental sensitive area within Mississauga and along the Credit River watershed. So it was really a mix of seeing an increasing threat on site while wanting to conserve and protect this space for both people and the ecology of the site. So that's what drove us into it. And I'll mention here that when I talk about those sort of intermittent volunteers, um, that sort of periodic volunteering that occurs is certainly not a lack of a result of a lack of enthusiasm. We get a lot of really tremendous groups that are very keen to support us. This is a group that comes out, every couple of years to support us with invasive species removal, huge amounts of effort. And this is what we've always kind of called the hammer of invasive species. So we get big groups that come out, remove loads of garlic mustard, and we've seen a lot of successes that way in terms of just sheer bulk of removal. Um, but what we found is that we were missing the sort of scalpel, right? So we had the hammer, this really hard hitting invasive species removal teams that would come out and support us with that. But we were looking for a team that could kind of get into the nitty gritty, get to areas where that were maybe a little bit more sensitive, that we needed to be cautious of some of our native plants, things like that. And so with that in mind, we ended up pursuing the Garlic Mustard Task Force. We call it the Garlic Mustard Task Force because we could not think of a cooler name for a group of people removing garlic mustard. Task Force, we just thought was a really good representation of the sort of elite kind of volunteers that we needed to get out there and make this kind of thing happen. So this was introduced in 2012, so it's been a while. I'm excited to be able to kind of report on some of this success. And it initially ran 4 times per week, relying heavily on volunteers from the community, really with a few predominant goals. The main goals were A, to eliminate garlic mustard as best we could, but B, also to see kind of if this was an effective way of making it happen. Also to ensure that we could engage volunteers in a positive way in this. We recognized right off the bat that we were asking people to do a lot of really big weeding, basically. So were there ways of making this fun? Were there ways of engaging people in a way that would make them want to come back and continue to work with us? And then, of course, is the educational piece. Right. So for those who may not necessarily be able to come out year after year after year, we wanted to make sure that anyone who did come out was able to learn, was able to engage, and was able to sort of get their footing underneath them in terms of what the impact of invasives are, and to hopefully take that home with them as they go about their life, and to make sure that invasive species is sort of a foundational educational point for them. So again, we ran this initially 4 times per week. I really don't think the number of events is as important as the consistency of the events. I think if you're running, a task force every couple of weeks or something like that, that's totally fine. I really think it's more about having a consistent date and time that volunteers can apply to and engage with in a more kind of understood and consistent manner. So within our garlic mustard task force, we wanted to have a good sense of how we were measuring success. So we do things in a way that we thought was kind of right for us at the time. We didn't really have a huge number of resources to be able to define, the number of garlic mustard stems removed or anything quite that nitty gritty. We kind of wanted to go kind of quick and fast with how we observed and assessed our garlic mustard removal. And I think it was the right decision. I think this has worked really well for us. It is not when we weigh our garlic mustard, it's certainly not a precise measurement of the aerial density that we're working with, but it does tend to be a relatively consistent one over time. And so and it's also been a really fun one for the volunteers, to be honest. Every time we finish an event, they're able to kind of get out there and be like, okay, well, I think we removed, 150 pounds today, or I think we removed 80 pounds today. And so you get a little bit of sort of back and forth and some kind of fun developing around that assessment criteria. And also by the end of the year, you're able to say, hey, we removed X amount of garlic mustard. And that's a really cool way of being able to showcase it. I've seen other kind of groups go by bag, like amount removed per bag. But what we found is as we were kind of trying to get our heads around where the garlic mustard was and exactly how we would go about removing it sort of more systematically, that as we were mapping those populations, weight actually ended up being a pretty consistent measurement. We were able to kind of showcase, we removed 500 pounds from this area in a year, or like 30 pounds from this area in a year, and it really kind of helped us out. I'll show you a little bit about what that looked like over time in just a moment. But we do map our populations as best we can. We're a big fan of before and after pictures. That's both in the short term and long term. I'll show you both of those today, as well as taking volunteer feedback. And I don't just mean this as like, did you enjoy the event? Did you have a fun time? But we've been really focused on making sure that our volunteers have a leadership role, or at least a collaborative role, in regards to how management of garlic mustard works on site at Riverwood. And so that feedback over time has developed into a really nice culture of people, feeling like they're involved. And more than that, having more knowledge in some case than our staff. Like, we have volunteers who've been out there who have been doing this program for 12, 13 years, which is longer than our staff have in most cases. So it's an interesting situation in that the consistency of information at Riverwood is actually sometimes lies with the volunteers in a lot of ways. And being able to download that information from them is increasingly important as we move forward. So definitely don't skip on giving your volunteers the opportunity to provide feedback, not just on their experience, but on the active management of the site, if those skills are available and can be leveraged. So here's an example of sort of short-term monitoring. This is, a garlic mustard patch on the left. I should mention, I'm not going to go into too much detail about, the specifics of garlic mustard or or why it's invasive or anything like that today. I'm really going to be kind of talking loosely in that regard. If you're looking for additional information on the plants themselves, tremendous resources on the Invasive Species Center website. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. But what I'll say is that garlic mustard has really taken over a lot of our forest ecosystems and really reduced biodiversity in those systems very considerably over time. So here's a quick example of, literally, a 2-day garlic mustard pick basically in this area. We came in, we removed a bunch of garlic mustard over the course of a couple of days, and you can see on the left where it's quite prevalent there, and on the right where it's gone. Very short-term assessment, right? Not necessarily super helpful long-term, but it does kind of get people jazzed up about this stuff, right? When they can see the difference they can make, showcasing that to volunteers is sometimes a nice way to get them interested early on. What I'll say though is, as we started mapping things, and this is all done in ArcGIS, but there are many other options for you. If you're sort of maybe a smaller startup organization, or you're just starting a community group or something like that, there are maybe simpler ways of getting into mapping. I know, like, QGIS is one of them, but also there's Google Earth Pro actually is like a really simple platform, really, really simple if you're just getting into this kind of thing. That is totally intuitive and very easy to work with. But this is our pounds removed in 2016. So you can see we have sort of generalized polygons around the site of, or populations around the site of garlic mustard. And again, kind of ascribing the amount of kind of poundage removed by our volunteers in those sites. You can see kind of some major core populations in this area, kind of in the middle there with the red. Those actually haven't been our priority. Our priority is always kind of these outlying populations over here, to try and remove those and kind of enclose the population over time. But I'm excited to be able to showcase some of the changes we've seen just in the past, well, sort of 8 to 10 year range, because we've been running this program nonstop every year for that time period. So we're seeing, quite a bit of garlic mustard on site here. I think this year we had somewhere in the realm of about 5,000 pounds removed from the site through the task force and various other initiatives, which is an awful lot. I don't want to skip over that. That is a huge amount of garlic mustard removal, especially for a community action perspective. But here we find ourselves in 2024, where many of these outlying populations are no longer, I shouldn't say they no longer exist. They no longer exist in the form of a population that we deem as necessarily mappable. Um, so we're talking very, very sparse, individuals of like maybe like 15 pieces or 20 pieces or a few pieces kind of along the trail. So really, really tremendous successes, particularly on the upper terraces here towards where the kind of infrastructure is, which was really one of our major expectations of the program, is that we would focus on the upper terraces first to try and limit the amount of sort of vectors for reinvasion. That core population is still very much in existence. We've hit it, as much as we possibly can, and we'll continue to. But we've seen some really tremendous gains in terms of the populations of garlic mustard on site. So again, I think what I might do actually is just go back and forth again, just to showcase that. A lot of these populations up north, and some of them even a little bit further south, now no longer in a position where we take the time to map them. We're still very cautious of those populations, very important to keep an eye on them. But overall, we're pretty pleased with where we are. I do want to showcase one particular site here. So this is this big orange site here. I think this was the 250 to 400 pounds removed from this site in a year back in 2016. And I want to show you kind of what it generally looked like at that point. So just keeping in mind that that's the population we're looking at, this is what the garlic mustard invasion in that space looked like, but for a much larger space. I don't really have a panorama here, but this really, spreads throughout the forest for quite some ways. Really large population, quite a bit of effort put towards this. I went down about a week and a half ago just to take a look at what that space looks like now. Now, I'll mention that in 10 years, a lot changes. So it's not going to be an apples to apples comparison, but I've tried as best I can to get a picture that showcases, as close to possible this exact shot, and to also kind of highlight some of the successes that we've seen as a result. So this is that picture. Recognize there's quite a bit of regrowth of a couple of different native trees and shrubs and things like that. We've also had a tree that fell down on the site, so I don't know if that helped or hurt, but it's certainly a different looking picture than the garlic mustard one. If you're not necessarily familiar with the regional plants in Mississauga or the GTA generally, I'll point out a couple of them here. But what I'll say is that there's very little garlic mustard here now. I think I counted 8 stems, and that's just about it. So we're really, really excited about the successes there, as well as sort of a lot of this regrowth that we're seeing, because much and most of it is native. So this is just one of the patches that's quite nearby. It's just about 2 steps away, where we have native plants working together in tandem to create this like beautiful coverage of native plants. We have a few different species here that I'll go over in just a second, but this is I don't want to skip over the importance of native plant planting if you have the capacity, because if you're able to create some of these populations of some of them are more kind of like aggressive native plants, you can really make a big difference with kind of holding space for those native plants instead of having those invasives come in. So native plants can really help you to combat some of this. I took a quick look around, and this is by no means a comprehensive detailing of all the different native plants in the area, but all of these exist in fairly high numbers within that space. Some of them planted, but many of them coming in, like wild columbine coming in on its own, Virginia waterleaf spreading very well on its own, wild strawberry coming in on its own, Jack in the pulpit as well. Zigzag goldenrod is one of those things that just does tend to really kind of spread its population, which is great as well. But a lot of really tremendous native plants, some of my favorite, are coming into the area. So to be able to see that 10 years later, an ecosystem full of native plants, it's really exciting to see the successes there. And so I know there may be people watching that are just starting up their programs and are maybe getting some uncertainty or elements of hopelessness when it comes to removal of garlic mustard. I'm here to very much say, keep with it. It makes a difference. And to be able to showcase this 10, 12 years later is pretty amazing. the entire composition of the forest floor has changed. And it's pretty wondrous for our volunteers to come back 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years later and to be able to see this. I know that's not easy. It's one of the challenges for the environmental field, I think, to be able to convey the impact that people are having. But it's certainly a huge success for us. Another success, and this is a population of trilliums that was highly threatened by invasive species. This was not planted in any way; it was just very threatened by garlic mustard. We had no pop-up of garlic mustard at all this year. So the population of trilliums is again kind of pushing back against it a little bit itself, but also trying to protect these beautiful populations is a big part of what we try to do in terms of priority. The garlic mustard task force's successes, I think, were many. As you can see, we've been quite successful in eliminating garlic mustard from many areas of the site over time. In 2018, we removed roughly 8,000 pounds of garlic mustard from the site, which is pretty tremendous. In 2024, closer to about 1,500 pounds from those same sites. So quite a reduction in density over time that we've seen as well. Maybe the biggest success from this particular venture over time has been that we have created a bit of a culture of invasive species management, particularly around garlic mustard. It's almost a bit of a meme at Riverwood. I'll have people come into the office and tell me, Derek, don't worry, don't worry about it, but I found like 8 or 9 pieces of garlic mustard down by the bus stop. I removed them by the root. It's all okay. Don't worry. I just wanted you to know. That makes my heart sing. It's really nice to see people who have taken to this as almost like a cultural element of their community. So they go out there and they remove the bits and pieces that they see, rather than necessarily relying on the task force to get out there. So it really has been pervasive in our community, to the extent where we're getting people who just know that that's something they ought to do and support it as best they can wherever they can. That's really exciting. But what we found was that at the end of the season, and this is a really good problem to have, but at the end of the season, people were wondering, what do we do now that the garlic mustard is gone? So enter our invasive species task force. We switched it up a little bit, and we also the focus on this was to try and get people involved in a couple of different experiences as well, so that they could get a more kind of rounded and refined experience from an educational perspective, but also to get them more excited about their impact on all aspects of the site. So we tackle a number of species. We tackle up to about 15 different invasive species on site. I'm not going to go over all of those, and I'm not going to go over them in too much detail either. I'll kind of flip through these next few slides just to showcase some of the stuff that we're doing. European buckthorn, I really never expected people to take to this activity quite as well as they have. This is the sort of quintessential team building activity. It takes multiple people to take down a buckthorn tree in many cases. In fact, it's usually better that way. You get a lot of laughing, you get a lot of better removal, frankly. So really high prevalence of buckthorn at Riverwood, which has been something we've been on top of over the last, or trying to be on top over the past 10, 12 years. Extractigators, if you're not aware of that tool, tremendous opportunity to take a look at that. They're a little bit on the expensive side, but Canadian invention and really, really awesome tool for removing buckthorn right from the root system, which is very difficult to do otherwise. We've also done solarization through our buckthorn baggies. If you're not aware of those, very cool little product that allows you to effectively individually solarize a buckthorn stump. So for things that are too large for the extractigator to pull out of the ground, those have been a really good option for us as well. Taking a look at disposal of invasives versus reutilization, all of our garlic mustard is disposed. With our buckthorn, we found it was just too large a challenge to be able to actually get it off-site in any way. And so I would say 95% of our buckthorn or more tends to be reutilized on site. And that means, using it to fence off areas that we don't want people to go, like keeping people on the trails. It means in some cases we get support from the city of Mississauga in their natural areas team to chip the material so that we can reutilize it on site in those specific sites to support plantings or anything in that realm. We've used it for creating fences and things like that are actually quite aesthetically appealing. So we've tried to reutilize buckthorn wherever we can. but we've been pretty successful here, generally speaking. I will commit to the statement that I don't think there is anything more destructive than a well-informed group of teenagers that have been given license to destroy something. This is a huge amount of buckthorn removal that happened through our high school volunteer program. This has been, I mean, this might be overkill, to be honest. This is just a massive amount of buckthorn removal. But what we found was that, oh, pardon me, I'm just going to go back a little bit. What we found is that when we removed all of this material, the impact on the ecosystem was maybe almost too much at one time, like maybe more than we bargained for even. But the impact, I'll show you in just a second with a couple of pictures, was really tremendous over time. Here's an example of the buckthorn baggie. We have this sort of little sticker here saying "Do not remove." It's a buckthorn baggie. It's an individual solarization effort, effectively. So you put the black bag over the remaining stump. You kind of spread that skirt out so that nothing can get light and it can't really sucker out of there. And usually within a year, you find that it's not able to really sustain itself. 2 years, I would say max. If you are looking at this product, they give you an option to take these stickers, the do not remove stickers. Please take that option. It takes one time of someone coming into your office and saying, Derek, I was out in the woods and I saw all these plastic bags all over the place. I gathered them all up for you and I put them right in the garbage. You don't have to worry about them anymore. It takes one experience of that to know that the right decision is definitely labeling your efforts wherever you can. Strongly recommended. A very, very cool product, though. So again, some of our successes, massive changes in the ecosystem composition with large scale removal, again, can be a little bit more than we bargained for at times. And a huge reemergence of the subcanopy, which is pretty tremendous. I'll show you a picture just now of the kind of before and after for this site. Before, of course, being very, very intensive buckthorn invasion. This goes right to the back of the site. It's nothing but buckthorn for days. Afterwards, and this is about a year and a half after that sort of extraction, you can see a full forest. You can see all those beautiful oaks that are now kind of getting a little bit more sunlight, a lot of more sunlight to the forest floor. Of course, that does mean a little bit of garlic mustards getting in there as well. Honestly, anytime you open an area up like that, you do open it up a little bit to invasion. But what I can say now is today, many of those plants have really established a very strong subcanopy. So we're back to getting into some really good forest health in this area, despite the sort of prior invasion. So very, very cool to see what the community has been able to come together and create here. I'm going to briefly go over these next couple so that we can just get to the rest of the presentation. But we do tackle a couple of species like Japanese knotweed, dog strangling vine, things like that are a little on the sort of very high threat, but maybe less prevalent at Riverwood. So we have relatively small populations of these species, but we are actively managing them, predominantly through digging and removal as well as solarization efforts. So tarping, basically, which is a bit of a slash and burn kind of mentality because nothing grows there. But for populations of species like this that are known to be like really quite problematic if they get out of control, it's meant that we've taken to some more kind of intensive strategies like this. So again, fairly small populations of the plant, but we found that solarization has been a strong option. I was told initially that it wouldn't be a good option for Japanese knotweed. We have found that it has actually worked in this case. In larger populations, I probably wouldn't opt for it. But for a relatively small population like this, this has been really effective. And again, those are all just volunteers doing this manually, helping us out. Phragmites is a big one, and I know that this is sometimes seen as less of a terrestrial plant, but we do have a couple of populations that I would probably label as like sort of semi-wet, mildly terrestrial. We have 2 or 3 core populations with several small satellite populations throughout the park. We have tried almost everything that you could find around removing invasive Phragmites. Solarization, digging, mowing, smothering, spading, all of it. we have found that the spading technique was a game changer for us. Lynn Short, who I think was at the Humber Arboretum at the time, was a tremendous resource for us on this. She came in, showed us the spading technique, and it was just an absolute game changer for us. The populations we had been trying to manage for, multiple years, 3, 4 years. When we did this, we would spade them out, which basically just means you're kind of cutting the Phragmites under the surface, about 2 or 3 inches under the surface, and then pulling the spade directly back out again, so you're not disturbing the earth at all. Well, you're minimizing your effect on the earth, and then just pulling the plant out, which meant that we were able to manage fairly large populations of Phragmites without having to resort to really damaging the soil as much as other opportunities for removal we're doing. So spading, excellent opportunity to take a look at that. Again, I won't go over that in too much detail, but do take a look at it if this is a challenge for you. The spading technique has just been a game changer for us. We have done it the hard way, which is digging it out by the rhizome. Honestly, it's been effective, but I don't really recommend it. The amount of person hours that have gone into these kinds of projects is just very, very high. It's been a high cost in labor for sure. Some of our successes with Phragmites, though, we've managed 10 of the 11 populations fully at Riverwood, which is really exciting. One of those populations, maybe 2 of those populations, were a result of some additional herbicide applications. But after removal of these things, it's been a huge increase in flora diversity, certainly, as well as in some cases the reemergence of wildlife like turtles, frogs, waterfowl, pardon me, things like that, which is that's the exciting stuff. That's what gets the volunteers really jazzed up. This is that other population that we dug out. So that, again, on the left is the before picture of frag. On the right, countless native species in here. We had, and some non-native, frankly, as well, but just a complete change in the ecosystem here. We have, wild bergamot and some different Rudbeckia. We have, cherry trees, things like that. Really high success rate here. And again, another example of Phragmites removal, though this was the population where we did resort to herbicide treatment, just to clarify. So we've had, but it's been a mixed approach, certainly. So what makes it work? So obviously, it's about the choice in terms of your actual work plan and how you want to approach these different opportunities for removal. But I really wanted to kind of drill down what I think has worked well for us from a volunteer perspective. And I think some of these are some sort of more broad-ranging ideas that might work for you, or it might be like bear just kind of thinking about a little bit. So what makes it work for us? Monica didn't know that she was going to be part of this presentation, but there she is on our resource for conservation leaders. That's actually a book that we have. Shout out to Nina Barabas, who created that book for us, one of our volunteers. It's about a 80-page book that describes a lot of the different methods that we use for invasive species removal, for planting, things like that. A little bit more background information on the ecology of Riverwood, just to get people off to a good start when they are looking to get into the more leadership oriented aspects of conservation at Riverwood. So I think it's really important to identify the goals of your volunteers. And I don't necessarily mean that on an individual basis every single time, but as people are coming out and working with you, to be able to identify, why is this person excited about being here? Are they just here for the community service hours? And if so, why did they choose us? Because there's always more than one reason. Maybe someone's out there because they really want to learn. We get a lot of people who come out of their post-secondary education and say, like, I have a really good understanding of the sort of baseline piece of things, but I'd like to know more about what it is to sort of get the practical element of invasive species removal or conservation in general. There's a lot of reasons why people will come out with you. And so to assume that they're just there to remove invasive species, I think is usually a mistake. There's almost always like a social element or a learning element associated with it. So finding what those general goals might be and working towards them is really important. I'd say from a more pragmatic perspective, your work planning is really important. When you have 30 volunteers working in a space where you could have 5, that's not a great experience. That's probably one of the worst experiences for a volunteer, to come out and use their time and not feel like it's respected. I'd also say on the flip side, taking, a group of 3 volunteers into an area where you need 20, that can be overwhelming and can kind of, create some shades of hopelessness. So choosing the right work plan for the right number of volunteers and the right type of volunteers that you have, I think is really important, and bears maybe quite a bit of thinking about. Um, at Riverwood, we have a huge focus on encouragement of curiosity and learning. Um, my general approach is that, if we lose a little bit of time picking garlic mustard because we find a really neat toad or a cool new insect that everyone wants to take a look at, I encourage that every single time. And I will do that because, it may take, 5-10 minutes out of your work plan, but it'll bring those volunteers back. And that's what we've seen again and again and again. Our retention rate in conservation is actually relatively high. We sit at around, volunteers who have been with us, with the organization generally for 5 years or more. There's about a 40% retention rate there. I think it's 35 to 40%. Oopsies, pardon me. I'm just going to go back there for just a minute. So encouraging that curiosity and learning and not being afraid of the timeline. Because providing those new experiences and trying new things is a big piece of retention. We found that, despite things like Japanese knotweed or being something that, most people will typically resort to some level of herbicide treatment, we have found that by doing it manually, we're also giving our volunteers a new experience, an experience to have input into, to provide some level of leadership or collaboration with us on. And those are the pieces to me that where we've seen the highest level of success. People who feel like they are part of it, like they are making the decisions or helping make the decisions, or at least being able to drive input, have been kind of the foundation of the program. And I would say probably the foundation of the organization as a whole. Highlighting your successes, just like I did today, right? Whatever successes you have, highlight them. Be cautious about setting realistic expectations. You want to highlight your successes without necessarily promising that garlic mustard population is going to be gone next year, because in most cases it may not be. But again, that I think falls under just providing a very high degree of clarity, understanding why we're removing the species, understanding how to safely and effectively contribute to the plan. Again, you don't need an 80-page book for that. These kinds of resources can be really supportive, and there's a lot of stuff online that may speak more directly to how to engage people in that regard. So, and the Invasive Species Center itself will have many resources on those sort of specific, specific species and how to remove and that sort of thing. And again, just coming back to those realistic expectations. I've engaged in the past myself with organizations who told me, when I was going to come out and remove all this invasive species or do this sort of planting activity, that we would come back next year and it would look totally different and it would be beautiful. And I think it's important that you are honest with your volunteers about long-term expectations. I think that has been key for us. We've never once at any point in time said, this garlic mustard removal activity, this is going to make a massive difference in 20 days. Because frankly, it won't. It'll look quite different in 20 days, but there's a realism to this sort of work that needs to be sort of long term. And I think that's been key in retaining some of our volunteers who have, literally been pulling garlic mustard on site for 12, 13 years. That's incredible to me, that sort of commitment. And again, I'll just double down on that sort of integration of volunteers in every aspect of the restoration process. It can't just be coming out to remove garlic mustard. I really believe that taking the feedback and input from well-informed and skilled volunteers that are able to leverage that feedback and leverage that engagement is vital. So involving them in invasive species removal and planting and the assessment piece, that is so important, I've found. The more that people are able to recognize the ecosystem for what it is, to be able to see the different sort of species that inhabit that ecosystem, the more they're able to kind of care about that ecosystem. And so it's that it's not just the sort of distaste for garlic mustard that comes into play. It is a love and a passion for that space as a whole, and for the many different species that will inhabit it or do inhabit it. So I really think that's important to involve them in the assessment, whether that be sort of formal or informal. And again, just looking for leadership and collaboration opportunities. We actually have a stewardship committee, like a natural area stewardship committee at Riverwood, that we do have a couple of volunteers who sit on. Um, that's important for us to be able to have people at the table who, again, we can leverage that skill set. We can leverage those new ideas that may come to the forefront. Um, Again, speaking to that sort of educational aspect or that sort of awareness or assessment of natural areas piece, there has been no better tool than the phone for that. It is the iNaturalist app in particular has been absolutely tremendous for us. This is just these are just some of the observations at Riverwood, and you can see they are very much clustered at Riverwood in the area. We really, really drive this for people. And I think the more that they're, like I said, the more they're able to sort of recognize the site for what it is, the amount of species that are there without even really, like, most people walking by wouldn't know, right? So being able to see, that new moth, or the cocoon of a praying mantis, or maybe it's like a new salamander species you haven't seen before. That kind of stuff really, really drives us home, and creates this culture of sort of citizen science, certainly, but also just like an excitement for nature. And so we've really drive that in almost every aspect of the organization where we can. I'd also just want to give a shout out here to EdMaps in particular, because that is a sort of a platform similar to iNaturalist, but quite specifically for invasive species. If you're looking to kind of track, this can actually help you on your site. If you can encourage people to use this on your site, this will actually help you to get a better sense of where some of those species are, while contributing to an overall kind of database of invasive species information, which is a powerful tool at times. The last thing I'll say is that just make sure you're having fun. Most of the people on this call, I imagine, are going to be pretty passionate about the environment. Um, that's something to carry with you, right? Where you can showcase that passion, where you can get people interested and get them excited. Don't be afraid of that. All these people are smiling pretty broadly, I would say, and it's all during invasive species events, which may not necessarily be the first thing you think of when people are this excited. But we've got people handling wildlife over there on the left, and removing some invasives in a field ecosystem, removing Phragmites in a wetland. These are all new experiences, exciting opportunities to work together and have that sort of social element as well. So make sure you convey your passion. Don't be skittish about that. Um, and then maybe the last thing I'll say before we get to questions, I have a genuine piece of advice, and it may seem a little odd. Bring a butterfly net with you. There is nobody between the ages of 4 and 104 who does not like having a butterfly net. It is a really great way to get people excited. It's a really great way to find some enthusiasm with some of these people who are maybe engaging with nature, in some cases, maybe not for the first time, but in some cases, maybe. We work very closely with the Newcomer Center of Peel in some cases, and we find that engagement with nature in Canada is a new thing for them, and so just about everything they're finding is exciting. So to capitalize on that excitement, but also to kind of find that piece of people that are just that taps into kind of a childhood excitement for nature, right? We kind of, in some cases, lose that over time. And I'm a big proponent of keeping that wherever you possibly can and encouraging it in others. And when you get that excitement for nature, when you get that passion that flows through these people, it really does make a difference in the commitment that they're willing to show, and their experience by their own account as well. So really, when it comes to retention, to me, it's about, informing, making sure that they have all the information, like every volunteer has all the information they need, stoking that passion wherever you possibly can, and giving them opportunities to be involved to the extent where it is possible. If there's someone with leadership capabilities and the ability and the interest in being a leader, encourage that wherever you can, because that has been the foundation of our organization, and really ends up being a huge part of the reason why our conservation program has been as exciting for people as it has, but also has been as effective as it has been on a more pragmatic level. So that may seem a little bit contrary to advice you may expect, but I really believe that if you can take a long-term look at this and in helping volunteers achieve their goals and getting them excited, that to me is the way to go every time. So I think we're at about that time. I want to say thank you. I want to say, first of all, thank you for everyone joining the webinar today, but also to a couple of our partners which honestly, none of this work would be possible without. I want to say a huge thank you to Credit Valley Conservation Authority, who sit on our stewardship committee and support us in myriad ways. And I want to give a special thank you as well to the city of Mississauga, who has been so supportive since the beginning. Their natural areas team in particular has been just wonderful, supportive, helping us with chipping buckthorn, all that sort of thing. So I want to say thank you to those, as well as if I have any volunteers from Riverwood on the call, a supreme thank you for all of your support over the years.
All right. Thank you so much, Derek, for that wonderful and very informative and engaging presentation. We do have a couple of questions. Um, so I'll start with this question right here. Do you recommend planting native plants by transplanting them or by seed if you want to speed up the process? I have a Phragmites removal project coming up this summer and would love your opinion.
Sure. There's a lot of variables there. So what I'll say is it depends on first of all, the landscape that you're dealing with, the types of plants that you're dealing with. If you're working on a Phragmites removal, for example, that is in the realm of, a fairly wet space, we have found seeding to be helpful. I haven't done too much in the way of direct seed dispersal for too much in the way of our forested areas. Most of our terrestrial plants are transplanted. We've done that in a couple of ways. So we actually used to have something, we just kind of retired it recently, but it was our native plant propagation program. And so we would collect seed from the area, we would bring it in, we would plant seeds in these trays, and then we would kind of lend them out to a few of our volunteers who were doing, we would call them our plant foster parents. They would take care of them for a year or a couple of years. They would bring them back and we would transplant them in the ground. That was, I think, more generally effective than a seed dispersal just kind of naturally. But it will depend on the site, I would say. If you've got like a very if you got an area in like a floodplain or that is prone to high levels of disturbance, it can be a lot harder to put transplanted plants in the ground and hope for the best. Seed dispersal sometimes is a better option in those cases. But it would also depend on what you're planting as well. So there's a lot of variables there that I'm not sure I can answer perfectly, but I hope that helps a little bit.
Great. So another question here. I know you did touch upon this a little bit in your presentation already. What about volunteers and herbicide usage?
Hmm. I'm going to assume that means like, do we have volunteers applying herbicides?
I
I
think
think I
so.
think
Yeah.
I'll assume that.
Mhm.
We don't. We don't have them applying herbicides directly in any capacity. That was something that we never wanted to dive into right off the bat, in any regard. In fact, most of the we really honestly we try to avoid herbicide treatments wherever we can. It does tend to be a bit of a last ditch effort for us. We have used it on Phragmites populations, and in the past, we're talking back in like 2013, 2014, maybe. There were applications that we did on buckthorn that were effective. But we felt that, wherever we can engage volunteers in like a new experience, that's been really helpful in maintaining a level of commitment to other projects as well. So if I can take someone in and for a couple of days focus on a Japanese knotweed population instead of contracting an herbicide application, um, that's actually been beneficial from the perspective of volunteer retention. I'm not sure if that necessarily answers the question, except to say that we don't use volunteers for herbicide applications.
Yep. Um, Here's another question right here. What age range do you recommend for volunteers? Would you do an all ages event or stick to mostly teens and adults?
Really great question. We've done all ages events. I would say teens and adults is your better option, depending on the species you're going for. There's some variables here, but if you're taking people into a wetland where you might require, waders and some fairly thick mud, maybe keep the kids out of that event. Garlic mustard picks are a wonderful opportunity for a family event. I think it's a very simple activity, all things considered, and it does tend to kind of get the family together. But most of our events are, I think we say 13 up, um, and that's just sort of high school forward. Um, Within that mixed group, we've had tremendous success. People working together, no issues whatsoever. For family groups, garlic mustard picks can work.
Great. With the difficult physical labor that invasive species removal often entails, how are ways you've introduced this as a fun thing to do for people entirely new to invasive species removal? Um, so,
Sure.
h- yep,
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question. You're right. It is intense manual labor, and when I first got into the buckthorn removal, I was completely floored by how many people were really excited about it. But it does take a toll over time. We've done a couple of cool things. I like to kind of gamify things wherever I can. So, for example, when we're doing, garlic mustard removal, um, whoever can find the largest root, right? And that's something that doesn't require like intensive garlic mustard removal. Sometimes what we used to do is be like, whoever can remove the most. But then that puts, kind of to your point, puts the onus on the people who might have more energy or might sort of capacity or ability to do that. So, the largest garlic mustard root used to get a prize for me, which is exciting, right? So you get ones like that big sometimes. It's really cool. Um, always make sure, from a safety perspective, make sure you're taking breaks, make sure there are opportunities for people to engage with the activity that don't necessarily require the intensive manual labor. So for example, I used to have people like take the GPS device and actually do the mapping of the site, right? For those who may not be able to actually dive into the activity. Same thing for planting. Sometimes you have someone, who has a watering can who can support with that, or maybe who's someone who's just taking measurements of the tree in terms of preliminary assessment. I really think accessibility in this space is really important, very very important. That's kind of a key tenet for us at Riverwood. So my approach is to make sure that you're working with your volunteers individually in terms of what they need. Um, but in terms of, if you're talking sort of a larger scale group that's just kind of getting tired with the same thing, again, my advice is shake it up. Gamify something in some way. If you do have a really hardworking crew who has high capacity, yeah, do the sort of compete against each other. We've also done teams, which works really well. If you can get a couple teams and say, okay, this team, you're going to take this area, this team, you're going to take this area. We're going to weigh the garlic mustard afterwards. Whoever gets more gets whatever prize is on the docket, maybe garlic mustard pesto.
that's great. How do you manage the public's interaction with poisonous plants, poison ivy, wild parsnip, etc.?
Sure. So I'll answer that in two ways. The first way is, participants to our program in regards to the public, um, high levels of education, making sure that we are, you know, directly showcasing what these native plants or what these kind of noxious weeds or noxious plants look like and what their effect is. A lot of it comes down to work plan assessment for that. We really try our best to not be in areas where there's poison ivy or wild parsnip or giant hogweed, things like that. Um, However, when it comes to the public in general, um, our overriding messaging is stay on the trails, and that doesn't always do it. But again, in terms of that sort of culture at Riverwood of invasive species management and of supporting the work that happens, with that comes people who are keen to sort of um, maybe sort of be looking in one way and not in another. So they're seeing the garlic mustard, but they may not see the poison ivy underneath that. So our approach is to really encourage people to stay on the trails wherever they possibly can, which is, I think, most of the time. In terms of managing the public's engagement with those plants is a hard sell, particularly in an area where we're getting 300,000 people coming through the site in a year. It is or more in many cases. It's a hard sell to protect the public from that. We do have signs with the city of Mississauga's support. There are a few signs on site that say, poison ivy here or wild parsnip here, that kind of thing. I think it's an education piece. And so a lot of our programming will include that sort of thing. But if someone is just coming to the park and they're not engaging with our education programs and they're not engaging with the signage and they're not engaging with, our invasive species or volunteer activities, they kind of take that risk upon them if they choose to leave the trail. So we do our best to try and make sure that that knowledge is conveyed. It's a really hard sell in a public park, honestly.
Great. So we're getting close for time here. I'm just going to ask one more question.
Sure.
Is it possible to get a copy of the Resource for Conservation Leaders book?
I can probably send a copy along. What I'll say is it may be particularly specific to Riverwood. There's a lot of stuff in there that's very specific, but if you reach out, I'd be happy to potentially pass on a copy. And you can see my maybe my email address at the bottom of the screen there. So feel free to reach out.
Great. And if there's any further questions, please reach out to Derek. So that is going to just conclude our presentation today. I'm just going to switch over the screen here. So thank you again, Derek, for presenting today, and thank you all for tuning in. This webinar was recorded and will be posted on our website, invasivespeciescenter.ca. Just as a reminder, please take a couple of minutes to fill out our survey. We would really appreciate it. Our next webinar will be next month, so please stay tuned for that. Again, thank you so much, everyone, and Derek yourself as well. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much, Monica. Appreciate it.